Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Tailgate here on the Believe Network. I am the coach Shannon Griffith, and alongside me, a friend of mine here in the northeast corner of Indiana, the judge, Phil Houk. Phil, I appreciate you joining me, and Phil has done a lot with the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame, covering them for 20 some odd plus years. The Fighting Irish Preview is his publication that he has started. Huh?
It's my baby.
It's your baby. That's right. For a long time. But Phil, I appreciate you coming on and joining us here today.
Well, thanks very much, Shannon. It's great to be on. And, it's kind of a dream of mine almost to be on an IU football show, because I love IU football, man. And we can get into the reasons why, but I love Notre Dame football. In fact, I got a DePaul football right now. I love Indiana football. When I say that, the whole state. And this game that's coming up, it's going thermonuclear as far as the hype, and I love it. But I think it's a great billboard for the state of Indiana and the great football that's played here in this state, not just at the college level, but at the prep level as well. We've become a football state, in my opinion.
Well, and the other ironic thing to all this, sometimes people really don't realize that Notre Dame is actually in Indiana. I mean, if you ask somebody, they would probably figure Chicago area, but yeah, Notre Dame is in South Bend, which is about hour and a half, 2 hours from the Fort Wayne area, both where we're very close to. And you're right. The excitement for college football in Indiana has risen here over the last year. Of course, what Marcus Freeman has done at Notre Dame, I don't think anyone would have thought he would get them to the point where they're at now, as quickly as a young coach, kind of being thrust into the spotlight after Brian Kelly just kind of abruptly left and went to LSU. But you're right. This game on Friday, December 20th, is gone from a head scratcher for a lot of people to one that now it seems like everybody's like very interested in. It may be the best first round matchup in terms of two Indiana teams facing off.
Well, you got, of course, historic, legendary, lore-ridden Notre Dame, Knute Rockne, Frank Leahy, Ara Parseghian, Lou Holtz. The tradition there is just remarkable. And then you've got the upstart. I mean, I'm on everybody out there knows the history of Indiana football, and it hasn't been quite as colorful as Notre Dame's. But what a tremendous story this past season has been, with Coach Cignetti coming in and just turning things around on a dime. And I have followed it fairly closely throughout the season. How could you not if you're interested in college football? And I have characterized him on my own podcast, on my own radio shows, and we've talked about Coach Cignetti and what he's done at IU. I've characterized him as Bob Knight reincarnated as a football coach. I love how outspoken he is, and I love how confident he is, and he obviously knows what the heck he's doing. Well, that's Bob Knight, and I think there's a good comparison there to be made, that he can do the same thing for IU football that Knight did for basketball.
Well, there's no question the portal and everything surrounding that has benefited Indiana, and it's benefited all teams, but Indiana in the sense that he really kind of flipped the roster after he arrived, where he had somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 kids, Indiana kids in the portal when he arrived. And then of course, bringing in a mixture of kids plus the JMU guys, which I thought he brought the JMU kids in, not that they're very good players and they're playing quite effectively and at a high level. But I thought the biggest reason he brought those kids in was to bring that winning culture mindset. You know, when you're at a school that has not had a winning culture and doesn't know how to win, the previous year they lost like 6-7 games by one score or less, and didn't get over the hump. I thought that was the main reason to wanting to bring those guys in, is to have that winner's mentality. And I think it's paid dividends from day one.
Yeah, these culture, or I should say these portal turnovers are not always good for culture.
Mm-hmm.
But and you look at what happened at Florida State this past year. They were 13-0, and then of course they lost their bowl game and they didn't make the CFP. And then their season just went to heck this year. I'm trying to be nice about it by saying that. Well, they brought in 30. They had one of the top rated portal classes, and I think they brought in 30 recruits.
Yeah.
IU brought in 31, and it didn't work there. But some coaches have that knack for building that culture fast. And I think part of that has to have been, from my outsider's viewpoint, I haven't followed it as closely as you have, is that Cignetti brought his own guys in who already knew his system, knew what he was all about, were already buying in. So you had that core come in that was able to pass that along immediately. I think I understand that starting this year for the Hoosiers, there's from last year's team, only about six maybe total that were actually starters last year. The rest of them, a lot of them are JMU guys, although the quarterback's not.
Yeah.
But a remarkable story, and not every coach can do that. Jeff Brom has been able to do that at Louisville. He brings in a bunch of recruits every year. He seems to get them melded really quickly. There's certainly a skill to that. On the other side of that portal equation, Notre Dame does not do it that way. Although they do bring key players in. Of course, their quarterback is a portal guy. But Notre Dame's goal, I think, every year, they still want to build through their recruiting, bring in those guys that are 4-year guys, and hopefully they're 3-year guys, because that means they were really good and went to the NFL. But build in that fashion. But every year, Notre Dame's going to also be active, and they have been the last few years and have been fairly successful at bringing in anywhere from maybe 8 or 9 to 12, 13 guys at most to supplement and to fill needs more than anything. But when you're a program like IU, new coach, all that, it makes sense that you bring in a whole bunch of guys, particularly guys who knew how to win.
Well, I think the portal now has become the great equalizer in college football, and then allowing teams that maybe are one or two steps behind the elitist in the college football world, the Alabamas of the world and Ohio States. And it's enabled some to catch lightning in a bottle and elevate their play enough that they can line up and play some of these big teams and stuff. But I agree with your assessment that, it's kind of live by the sword, die by the sword type of mentality, because if that's the way you're going to go in the portal, you're going to have good and bad. And we've seen that with Florida State and Indiana, which are the two opposites of the equation. But I think Cignetti has the right mindset with the portal. And I'm going off my old coaching days, is that when he wants kids that he can view their productivity on tape. He doesn't want somebody that was a 4-star with a lot of possibilities and that type of stuff that hasn't touched the field. He wants a kid that he can evaluate, see his productivity, and then try to get that kid to join him. So I do think he has the right mindset, and I think that'll ultimately benefit him. Now, a little bit of backstory here: you are a graduate of Indiana, undergraduate at Indiana, and so you're kind of divided a little bit here, aren't you? Just a tad about this game with your alma mater.
If I have so many divided loyalties, it would curl your hair. It probably wouldn't. I mean, you've been in this game a long time, but I'm in the game too. I mean, I'm a journalist, and when I made that transition from fan to journalist, and it's really happened over a period of time where now I don't look at the game anywhere near the way I did as a fan.
Yeah.
I just love the story. But do I have divided loyalties? Yeah, I'm a proud graduate of 1983. I remember Indiana football. Lee Corso was my coach. I love that guy. And I remember running into Lee on campus when I was a student down there. And I would say, oh, there's Lee Corso. And I would walk up to him and say, Coach, let's win one this week. I've followed IU football very closely, but yeah, Notre Dame is in my blood. I mean, I was born and raised in South Bend, 3 doors down from Newt Rockney's house. That's true. That was my sandlot, was Newt Rockney's yard growing up. Honest true story. And then I used to trick or treat at Era Parsegian's house. Era lived just about 3 or 4 blocks away. And of course, I grew up in the era of Era, and I still revere that man. I almost get emotional when I talk about how the impact that I feel like he actually had on my life, which is, you know, may sound kind of odd to say, but a great man. And yeah, so I started going to Notre Dame games when I was about 6 or 7 years old, and I've never lost that loyalty, even though all those years at IU, and I enjoyed IU football, and now I've had a kid go to Purdue. I've had a kid play at DePaul.
You're all over the place now.
Yeah, and of course I finally got one kid who got a graduate degree from Notre Dame, but no, I never went. People assume I went to Notre Dame, and no, I always say I'm a Catholic kid that was born and raised in the shadow of the Golden Dome, and so. And it's a great tradition, and I just love the game. There's no doubt about that, and I love having this little slice of it to be able to feel privileged to be able to cover the game.
Yeah. Well, growing up down a couple doors down from Newt Rockney, I guess, you were kind of forced into the blue and gold at a young age.
Yeah, and I'm kind of old. I've been doing this for a really long time, but it's not true that Newt was still on this earth when I lived 3 doors down from his house.
No, I get that. I just think that, having that mystique that kind of, stuck around, but being around the Era Parsesian years and, all that lore and tradition that, was at that time period is kind of a special time period in the history of Notre Dame. Yeah, history of Notre Dame football. I had one opportunity to attend a game at Notre Dame back when I was a senior in high school. I was being recruited by Ole Miss. And in those days, they could, if they were near you, you could go to the game and they'd get you tickets for it. So I got to see Ole Miss play Notre Dame. Lou Holtz, I believe, was coaching at the time. And I was in awe of the stadium and just the, all the traditional aspects that you think about Notre Dame when you see it on TV, but it's nothing like seeing it live at Notre Dame.
Yeah, the campus is obviously very special to me, and those games, some of the fondest memories of my life growing up were built right there on that campus, and many of them right there in that football stadium. So, 66, 73 national championships, 77, 88, they just roll off my tongue. I'm very fortunate to have been able to live through those 4. And then 28 years ago, I cooked up this idea to start this radio show, Fighting Irish Preview, and expanded my my own personal career, which isn't the one that pays the bills, isn't this one,
right?
But it's been a passion and a joy, and I've learned a lot about football, and I've also had some other opportunities that weren't directly related to Notre Dame. And I had my 14 years with the University of St. Francis, doing analysis for that on the radio broadcast there, and that taught me. And I learned how to tell football stories, and I learned a lot about football during that time span. So this was kind of a natural progression, and it's a real privilege, and it's great. And this game coming up this week, I've never seen. I won't say never, but I don't think I've seen anything quite like this one coming up. It's historic in many ways, and to have IU and Notre Dame teeing it off on December 20th, ho ho ho, right? And
right.
It's going to be fantastic, and it snows at the drop of a hat in South Bend, Indiana, because they're close to Lake Michigan, and you don't know what's going to happen on December 20th. Trust me.
Well, that was one of the things that, I was going to ask you, because we're all aware of lake effect snow. And when that happens, it's like, a dump truck sitting over the top of you, just dumping snow on you. Kind of, I think Buffalo, New York went through that this week with some of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that would just add to the, I guess, the mystique of the game and things of that matter. And, you talked about your radio show that's on in 1380 The Fan right here in the Fort Wayne vicinity. And, enjoyed those years that you've done that every Saturday morning. So I know all the Irish faithful enjoy that show as well. But college football playoffs. Let's talk a little bit before we jump into the game here quickly about your viewpoint on this first year college football playoffs. Who gets in, who doesn't get in, and all that stuff. But what were your thoughts going through the year with this college football playoffs as it pertains to Notre Dame?
Yeah, well, I thought it was a good plan. Now, as it pertains to Notre Dame, what were the odds when Notre Dame walked off that field after being taken out by Northern Illinois, 16-14, week 2, that Notre Dame was going to have any shot at making the college football playoff? I don't know what the odds were at that point in time, but all of us inside that cover it day to day, and practically everybody that knows anything about the game, knew that Notre Dame was going to have to reel off 10 straight wins. That was the only way in for them. And so they were able to do that. And one of my takes on that is that I don't know that Notre Dame would have been where they are now if they hadn't have lost that game. Now, how no motivation works.
Yeah.
And Notre Dame has been a very motivated team. They were embarrassed. Marcus Freeman was embarrassed. And we saw in the press conferences a change in his persona after that loss. And it never changed. And there was definitely a little more edge on him. And he was a little more serious, and he didn't smile as much. And we know that he used that loss as a way to drive his team to be motivated every single week for the next 10 games. And here the Irish are, and they have come out and they have attacked every game. There haven't been any let up in any game since that loss. And when you combine that with the fact that this is a very talented football team, Notre Dame is loaded with 4-star recruits who have been productive, not just potentially. They've been productive, and you combine that with good motivation, and you combine that with a great coaching staff at Notre Dame. They've become a pretty formidable team.
Well, yeah, they've got excellent talent and talent that you would expect at a Notre Dame, school.
But your question, Shannon, I'm sorry I kind of got off track there. We wanted to talk about the, and this is fun. I just love talking football, right?
Yeah.
But we just wanted to talk about the CFP in general. 12 teams is an odd number, right? I mean, it's not odd; it's an even number. But it for a tournament, that means you're going to have buys. You're going to have to do some other stuff. Well, that's kind of necessitated by the college, or I should say, by the conference championship games, right? Yeah. This system doesn't work great as long as there are conference championship games, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to go, and so they had to make it. Had to reward teams for playing that extra game. Notre Dame doesn't play the conference championship game, so they had no chance of getting a first round bye. And I was okay with that. It made perfect sense to me. As a matter of fact, they had their bye on conference championship weekend. But the whole thing is just kind of icky. I think you just take the top 16 teams and play it off in that way, and you got to get rid of those conference championship games. You could start the calendar a week earlier and get this thing done. You'd get this thing done by the middle of January or maybe about the 10th of January. But this year, we're going to play that championship game on January 20th. Man, that's almost that's competing with the NFL conference championship games at that point. So.
Some schools go to spring ball about the 1st of February. So depending on where you're at, you got all that too.
I hadn't even really thought of that, but that's those Southern schools will do that. And, so that season's going late. And I think the whole thing would come down better if they go to 16. I'm still a guy that loved the bowl system.
Yeah.
I think, and I didn't mind debating all winter long. Well, why didn't the AP vote for this team? I kind of like that system. It wasn't bad. But if we're going to have this tournament, and we are going to have it because there's so much money involved, they're going to have to. It'll go to 16 teams, I think, and I really do believe they will eventually eliminate the conference championships, and that just makes the whole thing seem more fair. And how can you be the fifth ranked team but be the eighth ranked seed? People were confused by that. And
yeah, right.
Confused by it, and I've been studying it all season long. By and large, though, I think the committee got the 12.
Yeah,
it made sense. I understand Alabama's argument. I understand Miami's argument, but I think SMU had a better argument. So
no, I agree. I just, the thing that I would say with the college football playoffs, and this is the one thing that I think is they've got to clarify. Number one, with the conferences, they have to play the same number of conference games. You can't have the SEC playing 8 and the Big Ten playing 9, because that's what the SEC does. So to me, that creates some issues in this whole equation about trying to, matrix the team. And then they've also got to decide what is the cutoff for the number of losses. You start debating about a 3-loss team. Well, again, you get into too much of this is better than that. And, that's all subjective, but I do think they have to draw a line in the sand and say, look, if you lose more than 2 games, you're not in the playoffs until we have multiple 3-loss teams that bring them back in. But I just think we've got to get some more clarity on matrices and what they're looking for with that. The argument that I would think that Notre Dame has to defend year after year after year is their independent status. Do you think that that Notre Dame at some time during this playoff thing will be forced into having to get into a conference and have to eliminate the independent status?
Well, that I'd hate to be the athletic director at Notre Dame or even the president of Notre Dame if that ever happens, because there's a lot of people with some really strong opinions on that point.
Yeah.
And for really good reason. Notre Dame greatly values their independence for a lot of reasons. They want to be a little bit different than everybody else. They don't want to be pigeonholed as a Big Ten team or a SEC team or an ACC team for that matter, although they're pretty close to that conference.
Yeah. Well, they're already in it in most of their sports, right?
In all their sports, except for hockey and except for a football, of course. But they have the affiliation for football where they play five ACC games a year every year. So and they were actually in that conference during the pandemic year, and they won that conference during the pandemic year. When they lost the conference, they run the regular season and they beat Clemson in the regular season that year, went undefeated, but then they lost their conference championship game to Clemson a week later after the season. But will Notre Dame be forced into? No, I don't think they will, because, and it's for that reason that I said a couple minutes ago. I think eventually the whole movement in this college football playoff is to get this thing to 14 and then the 16 teams. Nobody's denied that. It's going to get there eventually. Right. And when that happens, it's the conference affiliation is not going to matter. Notre Dame will just simply have to win and be one of the top 16 teams in the country. Mm-hmm. And they can continue to do that and play the national schedule that they so desire. And that's going to eliminate. And let's talk about those conference championship games. The reason they're not eliminated, or the reason they came about, is because they're very lucrative.
Absolutely.
And so how do you bridge that gap? Well, I saw one column that I read in this past week that said, well, they can bridge that gap, and it's going to cost about $50 million to get the conferences to drop. You know what? $50 million is out there in this system now. And if they go to 16 teams, they can come up with a formula that would convince the conferences that it makes more sense to go to 16 teams, eliminate those conference championship games. I don't think the coaches would be really upset with that.
No,
because they don't want to play that it's not really an extra game, because almost he plays one if they're good. But just get on to the playoffs.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing too. I think they became vital back in the days when you had just the bowl system and you're trying to figure out who the 4 best teams were and that kind of service that. The thing that is the problem now is what we're finding now is the Big Ten is quote unquote a super conference. I mean, you got 18 teams in it and you're at the mercy of what the computer spits out for your schedule. You know, that was one of the big issues with Indiana this year about, well, they didn't play anybody. And then you have to sit down and say, well, when Nebraska came to town, they had 1 loss and Indiana shellacked them. They didn't, every team that Indiana played was either 500 or better than 500 when they played them, including Michigan. And those are the things that if you really sit down and look at it, yeah, you got to be more in depth with it. But with what I'm trying to get at is because they're playing a conference with 18 teams in it or 16 teams in it, how do you determine who are the 2 best teams when you've got different schedules and stuff like that? So I'm not quite sure what that service is in terms of why you go to 18 teams in a conference. Again, money plays a big part, but I think it'll be interesting how that dynamic in the future is handled. Per se, and like you said, I think we're going to 16 sooner than later.
Here's a thought that I've never spoken about before, but just came to my mind when you were saying that, Shannon. Why? And I know a little bit of this background. Why are there conferences? Well, there's conferences. They're historically built because teams in the same area would band together and they would agree to play each other, and it made sense.
Right?
Does that make sense anymore when you have the ACC with 2 teams on the West Coast, the Atlantic Coast Conference? I mean, is that the Big Ten? The same thing. That the SEC is still fairly regional, but it does. And in this age where you can travel pretty quickly and all that stuff, why do you need conferences? I
think that's going to be the big question moving forward too. But I don't know if
you get there.
Yeah, I just think if you start losing some of this tradition, it's going to really impact college football in a negative way. And because of all the different things that are happening now, the NIL and now profit sharing and things of that nature, we're slowly but surely losing that traditional mindset. So I'm not sure we can solve it in a day.
This could be a really long podcast.
Yeah, it could be really long if we wanted to solve it.
It's just a great
well, I think it just gets to the point where I know there's a lot of people out there that really hammer Notre Dame because they're not in a conference, and you lose to Northern Illinois, and then you win 10 straight in the equation, but you're not in a conference playing, boom, 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 a schedule like, in the Big Ten or SEC, whatever, however you look at it. And it's the same thing like with Indiana, because they haven't had a tradition-rich program and they're not brand awareness. They go like they do this year and, have a stumble at Ohio State where they basically gave Ohio State the game. They gave them 14 points off of special team turnovers and errors and that. But it's just, there was so much of the people pushing the brand of an institution or a school more so than a record or who they played or who they lost to, the Alabama scenario. You can't go to Oklahoma when you're 3 touchdown favorite and get smoked by Oklahoma and expect to have any favors going into the college football playoffs. But because they're Alabama, everyone just assumed they should be in it. So that's another dynamic that the college football playoffs is fighting, is this brand awareness. And I hear you about the 16 team, but I've already heard teams talking about, well, that means the SEC should get 4 spots and the Big Ten should get, this many spots, and they're already handing out the spots. Well, that's not a playoff. That's a glorified,
that's a cash.
Yeah, it's crazy. So we'll let that handle. Let's get back to the ball game at hand. But go ahead. What did you want to say?
But let's talk a little bit about strength of schedule, and we can talk about relative strength of schedule between IU and Notre Dame, because it's clearly a pertinent fact. Now, there is no question that Notre Dame caught some breaks with their schedule this year, but They're the only team to have defeated 4 teams that were ranked in the top 25 at the time they played them. Okay.
Right.
And that's significant. The only team that's still ranked in the top 25 is Army. And if you see me turning my head, I'm actually checking the Army Navy score as we speak.
Yeah, Navy's gone up on them now.
Well, and Notre Dame whacked Navy pretty good too. Navy was undefeated when they played them, and they were ranked. But Notre Dame's strength of schedule, relative strength of schedule, and there are a lot of different rankings out there that rank in different ways, and you've seen them. But the one that, and I think it's not Pro Football Focuses, but I'm not sure where this ranked, but it has Notre Dame's schedule somewhere around 61st, and IU's somewhere around 81st, and that's significant.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think Notre Dame did play a tougher schedule, but not by much. And that is so subjective, those ratings. But I think Notre Dame had a little bit, we know, that Indiana missed some pretty good teams in that Big Ten. Oregon, of course.
Well, right.
Penn State,
mm-hmm.
Illinois is great this year. Iowa. But that's the nature when you have, and I think that was part of your point, is that the Big Ten has become so big that's going to happen some years. So what's the point of having a conference?
Yeah, it's not even a logical argument, because of the size of the conference. You can't play a 17 team or NFL style schedule in the Big Ten because of number of teams, and you're going to have years where you're going to miss some teams.
And you don't know until the end of the season who you really missed. That was good. Now, I think we can lead this in pretty nicely into, if we talk about this one, because another one of those teams that IU missed was USC. Mm-hmm. And USC, of course, they ended up 6-6 or something, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, what? USC is loaded with dudes.
Oh, absolutely.
They're closer to Notre Dame, in my opinion, as far as talent level, really close. They had some issues there. They lost a lot of close games. In fact, they lost every single one of their games. They were within except for one, the Notre Dame game. They actually led in the fourth quarter of every game. They missed them too. I think they have the caliber of talent similar to Ohio State. Not as good as Ohio State, but not bad. I mean, they're very physical up front, defensive line, all that stuff. Their offensive line really good, excellent. The receivers are great, really good and their quarterback, Maeva, I think they found a guy who can really play. Okay, and similar in talent level to what Michigan has, even though Michigan had a down year this year. But you look at that roster up and down, 4-star kids, good physical team, and IU learned about that physicality and managed to survive it in what my view. And I watched a lot of that game, actually sitting in the Notre Dame press box that day. And IU played really well in that first half, but I thought that physicality, which is a little bit at a slightly different level than what IU has, started to wear them down a little in that second half. That may be one of the keys that we have in this game. IU, I view as being an extremely productive team, and that's a Cignetti buzzword. I know that. But he is getting everything out of these kids who came in as experienced winners from other programs, quote unquote, lower level programs, but they knew how to win. But when push comes to shove, there's a little bit more talent on a team like bigger, faster, stronger factor is what I call it.
Mm-hmm.
On a roster like USC, Michigan, Ohio State, and Notre Dame has. That doesn't mean you're going to win, because you also have to be motivated and you have to have a great coaching scheme. But I think that's one of the differences that you'll see in this game, is there's a little more Michigan and Ohio State like physicality on the Notre Dame team than a lot of those other schools that IU was so successful against.
Yeah, I think Indiana, they hit the proverbial wall in the Michigan game in the second half, but they won 20-15. They go to Ohio State, they take the opening drive and go right down the field and march it right down the field on Ohio State. But if you look at the statistics of that game, even though they lost, Ohio State had their lowest productive output offensively of the year, with the exception, I think, against Michigan on that day. And I think this is what some people will find out, or, they look at Indiana from a distance, understand that they're winning and they're doing it in some cases convincingly. And I don't think people realize how good they are until they play Indiana. You know what I mean? It's like, you got to see them play against the team that you're either covering or a part of. Like, they're a legit national ranked defense that nobody has really been able to rush the football against. And if you look at this game and break it down, I mean, that's going to be the story of the game on Friday, is who is going to be the team that runs the ball most effectively. That ultimately probably will have a big say so in who wins this game, because in the month of November and December, if you cannot run the football in the Midwest, your chances of winning are very slim.
And particularly on December 20th in South Bend, Indiana.
Right.
And that is one of the article I wrote yesterday that I came out with. That is one of my factors. Is I think Notre Dame, if they're able to have success in this game, they're going to have to run the football. And I know how good I know it statistically, whether they're number 2 rush defense in the country, giving 1.9 yards per carry. I mean, some insane number, how successful they at IU has been against the run. But Notre Dame is very explosive.
Mm-hmm.
Jeremiah Love, Notre Dame's got IU, I know, has 2 really good running backs. Notre Dame's got 2 extraordinary running backs. Yeah. Jeremiah Love may be the best running back. He's really good. I don't throw this stuff around as a fan. Trust me.
No. I get you.
Jeremiah Love is an extraordinary talent, and he's got top end speed. And man, you find a way to get him a crease, and he gets through it. Good luck at the second level trying to stop him. So Notre Dame's a little more explosive. But I know that the rush defense for IU has been extremely good. Notre Dame brings the added factor of a running quarterback.
Yep.
Which is why that Riley Leonard is at Notre Dame, because Notre Dame had to play against him last year, and the coaching staff was so impressed by how difficult it was to coach against.
Yeah, he's a big kid.
That they brought him in, and he had a history as a running quarterback in his background, and so he comes in, and he hasn't lit up the world as a passer, but he's been effective. He's only 16 touchdown passes but only 4 interceptions. Those are good numbers. Mm-hmm. He's run for 14 scores, and those aren't just 1-yard plunges.
Right.
He's explosive in his own right and has good speed. And when he gets to the second level, he's really tough. And as a football coach yourself, coach, how difficult it is to deal with an offense that has that added dimension. Because when you have to account, it's one thing to have to account for a pass, all the runner, but when that quarterback can not only pass the ball but can run the ball himself, you got something else you got to plan for. And Riley Leonard is really good at that.
Well, this is where I think the Mike Denbrock factor has come into the success of Notre Dame's offense this year, because look, Riley Leonard is your second leading rusher on the team. Prior to the year starting, nobody would ever have thought that. He had a pretty serious injury against Notre Dame when he was at Duke. That was number one.
And he missed spring practice.
Right. And I do think that his ability and what Coach Denbrock's done to putting him in a situation where he's carrying the football has really opened up the running game for Notre Dame, because now defenses have to account for him. And that's what I've always said about a running quarterback. If you can run the football, run power, run some things with the quarterback, it puts a defense in a bind, because normally they discount him on running downs. And so that, to me, is the one thing that Indiana is going to have to do very good. And it's not to say they haven't faced running quarterbacks or people that pull the ball and do all that stuff. is that, but they've got to be disciplined in that arena, because that's when Riley and Leonard surprises you and goes for 20 yards or 30 yards, or, has that big touchdown run that you weren't expecting, on top of what Love and Price bring to the table in the backfield. So it'll be interesting there with that, chess game between Denbrock and Brian Haynes. Kind of the wily veteran against the new young up and comer. And I don't know if I said this to you, but I gave Brian Haynes his first job in college football coaching for me.
I love
year. And
I love hearing that kind of story.
And I knew from that day when I got to watch him be around kids and coaching, he had that it factor, and he has done a phenomenal job in the two places he's been a coordinator, at JMU and Indiana. And he's been nominated for the Broyles Award at both institutions, which I'm not sure has ever been done, but that will be a good dynamic to watch. Indiana run defense against Notre Dame's run offense. And so Indiana has a way with their defensive structure to force offenses to pause a bit because of how they do things. And that's one thing that I think helps Indiana against some of these, teams like an Ohio State. I mean, they held, outside of that late run, Ohio State only had 79 yards rushing against Indiana, and Michigan couldn't even move it. So that's going to be the game. The game is going to be right there. Notre Dame's run offense versus Indiana's run defense on top of that.
And what I would expect to see in that area, and it consistent with everything I've seen out of Notre Dame this year, is IU's going to stuff them a lot. I mean, you'll see 1-2 yard gains, you'll see 1 yard losses, but Mike Denbrock, and I have a lot of respect for him. And
Mike's a great coach.
Was he not the Broyles Award winner last year as the offensive coordinator for Cincinnati at LSU?
Yeah, right, with Kelly, right.
Yeah, and Denbrock, of course, he's on his third time around at Notre Dame now, and so we know how good he is. But he probes in this game, and then eventually they find a way to get him to the second level. And these guys, Price has had almost as many explosive touchdowns as Jeremiah Love,
right?
And so that's what I would look for. And so you're going to see, I expect, with as good as that defense has been, that particularly their run defense, I would expect to see a lot of 3 and outs, perhaps, and maybe not a lot, but at least a few.
Well, right. Well, and the other thing is, when you flip it to the other side of the coin with Notre Dame's defense and Indiana's offense and Notre Dame offense are very close in the national statistical averages. I mean, they're 1 or 2 away from each other, no matter what statistical category you look at, and kind of the same similarities on defense as well. So in a lot of ways, I think they're very equally matched. In a lot of ways, I think there's a lot of similarity. I think Al Golden has a very aggressive defense, because I think he's become a more aggressive in his structure. Maybe that's because of Marcus Freeman. But
I can give you 2 reasons, but I want to hear the rest.
Go ahead with what you feel like has made Al Golden a more aggressive defensive coordinator than what he has been.
Well, he's not Notre Dame is not particularly stout in the middle of that defensive line. They're smallish. Kurt Hinish, 278 pounds on the nose. He ain't 310. That's kind of hard to hold the point. And the pass rush has been hurt significantly at Notre Dame as they've encountered injuries through the year. Boubacar Traore, who was early on leading the team in sacks, he goes down. Jordan Botello, he was slated to be the key pass rusher. He went down early in the season, and suddenly IU or Notre Dame is on their third best pass rushing. They just don't have a natural pass rusher. Bryce Young, I think, is going to develop into a good pass rusher. Junior Tuihalamaka has been.
Wow.
That's for me to say, but he's come along. But so Alec Golden has had to get aggressive. He's had to get very creative to bring pass rush. A lot of and so here's one of the keys there. Kingston Viliama Amasa, KVA freshman, linebacker, kind of became a pass rush specialist from his outside linebacker position. Well, he's questionable for this game. He may not play. He didn't play against USC, and you saw what happened there. Notre Dame is, and here's the other reason why my second point is that Notre Dame's plays a lot of man coverage.
I see that. Yeah.
A lot. And I think there's some stat out there that indicates that they play either the first or second or third most man coverage. Pro Football Focus may have this number in the country, but they can do that on the outside. They've got some pretty good quarters that, and people were complaining about what Christian Gray against USC giving up a whole bunch of yards. He was the guy who had the 99-yard touchdown return at the end.
Yeah.
But part of the reason for that was he was locked down pretty good. But when you give 4 seconds or 5 seconds to a good quarterback, because Notre Dame was not getting a good pass rush, he's going to
get open. Yeah, somebody's going to get open.
And so pass rush on Rourke from Notre Dame's perspective is going to be really important. And strength up the middle. I don't know what Al Golden can come up with, but I would expect, unless they come up with that pass rush, I wouldn't be surprised if Curtis Rourke can do the exact same thing that USA was able to do. And they passed for 379, 380 yards against Notre Dame, even though Notre Dame's numbers on the season had been very good. But that's because of an inability to develop a pass rush, and they don't have the big dudes right in the middle of that defense either. So,
well, and from Indiana's perspective, and with Curtis Rourke, he's a very smart quarterback. He understands the philosophical approach to what Indiana wants to do. They are a big run pass offense. I mean, that's 90% of their normal down calls are run pass in this regard. So, and that's one thing that is hard to defend, because as a defensive coordinator, it's hard to take everything away. But when you put the run pass option in a quarterback's hands like Curtis Rourke, and you're trying to devise a scheme, sometimes they lock into you and then you're never right. That's what they did against Nebraska and their defensive coordinator the whole game. He was never right in what he tried to do, because Curtis Rourke was just one of those days where he would either hand it off because it was a light box, or he pulled it and threw it because it was a heavy box. I mean, that's how simplistic in some respects they've gotten with, the game. But Curtis Rourke, most definitely is a kid that has been a big, huge boost to Indiana in the same way that Riley Leonard's been a huge boost to Notre Dame. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, the interesting thing that I see on Notre Dame's defense, which I think is pretty cool, Jack Kaiser, he's playing will linebacker for Notre Dame. Jack Kaiser played at a 1A school over in Pioneer High School, and he was a phenomenal player.
Jack Kaiser, the pride of Royal Center, Indiana.
Played
town.
Yeah, I think he played quarterback there and maybe some linebacker at the time. And I think everybody was a little bit surprised that Notre Dame took the kid back then, just because who'd he play against and all that good stuff. But look at him now; he's playing pretty good football. He reminds me a little bit of Tranquil and how he plays. And but I do think overall these type of games to me, Phil, against two teams like this in a tournament type of game, somewhere, some way, these type of games get decided by turnover margin and the kicking game. As crazy as that may sound, it becomes a game who makes the less mistakes, stays away from stupid penalties, but who else, takes care of the ball, or who can take it away. And then ultimately, how does the kicking game factor into a game like this? Because that's just the way these games ultimately play out when you got two similar teams and going at it in a game.
Well, here's and you're right on track with what I think it was in my article I wrote yesterday. And that is how I view these teams as on paper as being really close. Okay, let's start at 0-0. Okay, here are the factors I think benefit one team or the other. One, I think the weather factor probably would end up overall benefiting Notre Dame, because I think Notre Dame is a better running team and IU is a better passing team. And if it comes down to run against run, I think and that would help Notre Dame. So let's give Notre Dame 2 points on that. Okay. Notre Dame's a home team. All right. What do they say that's usually worth? Sometimes 3, sometimes I'll say 5
Yeah.
points. But I'm gonna give Notre Dame 2 points on that because I have a feeling there's gonna be some red in that stadium on Friday night because I know how
They're
hard.
trying.
Trust me, I know it, and I have so many friends who are IU fans, and can you get me tickets? I go, yeah, but you can't wear red. But anyway, I'll try to get you tickets, but you can't wear red. Anyway, so all right, so that gets that gets Notre Dame up to a 4-point favorite. I think Notre Dame overall has better dudes, better talent than IU. I mean, they got more 4-star kids, and we know that doesn't always
translate
into production, but nonetheless, it's a factor. And Notre Dame's got more depth, and as games wear on, that comes into play more and more. So we're up to +4 for Notre Dame. Let's give Notre Dame another 2 points for that. Okay. So Notre Dame's suddenly up 6-0 on this scale that we're using. You mentioned the kicking game. Notre Dame can't kick a field goal, right? At least to this point, to save their lives. Their kicker, Mitch Jeter, has been injured. He is 6 of 14 on the season, something like 6 of 12. He's kicked 1 field goal in the last month. He had a groin injury earlier in the season, and he just hasn't been able to get back. They've had problems with the operation. Overall, Notre Dame is 8 of 18 on field goals. It has not bit them one bit, though. It's going to bite them, or it may well bite them. And I know that IU's got a better kicking game than Notre Dame. So Notre Dame was +6. I'm going to take 3 away because their field goal game is so bad. So we're at maybe a 3-point game. So it's a 1-possession game, a field goal game coming down to the end. So what does that usually come down to? It comes down exactly what you said, Coach. Turnovers, right?
Right.
Okay, so let's analyze that one. Notre Dame is +16 in the turnover category. That's phenomenal. They are that makes them tied for 2nd in the country in that category. Well, guess what? I'm not telling the IU audience anything they don't know. IU's really good at turnovers. They're +14. So it's almost a wash. It's a 1-possession game coming right down to the wire. Yeah. That's all I can say. That's my analysis.
Unless something wacky happens where, you get the big momentum chafe, you score and then they turn it over and you score again. And, those type of games that kind of get away from you.
And so turnovers, that they cause those sorts of things. And
exactly.
If that happens. And of course, that's what turned the tide for Notre Dame against USC a couple of weeks ago. By the way, have you ever seen a game where a team gets a 99-yard pick six, Coach, and then 1 minute later they get a 100-yard pick six?
No, I know that was the big factor in that ball game.
I almost, I was not at that particular game, but I'm there on my stat broadcast, and I got the big screen on. I got a photographer at the game. I'm totally engaged, and my stat broadcast is running about 15 seconds faster than the
TV.
Than the TV. And I try not to watch it because I like to watch it actually happen up on the screen. And my wife is actually in the room with me. And I just go, oh my God, you have to watch this play because I knew what was happening. All of a sudden it came up with a 100-yard pick six after we just saw a 99-yarder. I've never seen that. I've been watching football games for almost 60 years. Good heavens. Turnovers, they can turn the tide like that. And if it happens like that,
and I do think that was the game that solidified everything for Notre Dame, because had they gone out to USC and maybe have lost that ball game, who knows?
College football playoff.
Who else would happen? But I do think that's a game that, solidified it. And what Marcus Freeman has done over the last couple of years, I'm in a roundabout way as an outsider, as a coach, I'm really excited for his future because of what he's done and how he handles himself. I think that's the one thing that comes across. Marcus Freeman handles himself really well.
I've said for a long time about Marcus that he's the right guy at the right place in history because the way the world is now with NIL, transfer portal, athletes being a little more thinking they're a little more entitled, Coach. It's different. That today. And he has the energy to deal with that and to relate with the kids. He's still what, 37 years old. He's a young guy, and he can relate to these guys. He's full of energy. It's been a little bit of a roller coaster under Marcus Freeman, but he's on a 10-game roll right now. And yeah, I think he's a terrific coach with a terrific future.
Well, yeah, and he's got a good staff around him. Like I said, I have a lot of respect for Mike Denbrock just because of going against him and knowing Mike for a number of years, and he's done a tremendous job with the offense. And then of course Al Golden. You know, what can you say about his career? I mean, he's been a top coach for a long number of years. So they've got the right ingredients. Unfortunately, they got to play for the state championship this Friday against the Indiana Hoosiers in a game that I think we're both going to be excited to watch and see what happens, because I don't think this one, even though Notre Dame's, I think, a 7-point favorite, 7.5 favorite right now, it's like you said, I think it could be a really close back and forth game, and I'm excited to see how it turns out.
Yeah, even at 7.5 points, that means we're still a one-score game, and so it's gonna. You know, I say 3 points. They're saying 7.5. It's a great matchup. It's great for football in the state of Indiana. I will see you in the press box, my friend.
I hope I can get around. I can get around. Well, we said we were going to go about 15 to 20. We're just going to have to make this a segment on the Hoosier Football Tailgate, because we've approached about 55 minutes as we sit here and gab.
You gotta be kidding me. Time flies.
Time flies. So I really appreciate you coming on, and Phil, and you can get all his stuff at theirishillustrated.com.
Fighting Irish Preview. FightingIrishPreview.com.
I'm sorry, FireIrishPreview.com with all the other content. And then, of course, here in Fort Wayne, that's the Fighting Irish Preview on Saturday mornings. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're over the air at Fighting Irish Preview, that show that's been on the air for 28 years, but it's also been a podcast. So wherever you get your podcast, you can listen to it. There's added content to that version of it. And, we're all over social media. Please go to Fighting Irish Preview and like our Instagram page. You're going to get some cool stuff there. And we're nice, even though we're Notre Dame and most of the people watching this are IU fans, I think you'll enjoy our content. It's definitely family oriented, but we love the game of college football. And as we know, I'm sure anybody that'd be watching this thing does as well.
Yeah, we've got a lot of fans that just enjoy the game. And of course, Indiana's storied season as we head to the college football playoffs. Notre Dame versus Indiana, live from South Bend on Friday, December 20th. That'll be on ABC, ESPN, or you can catch it on any of the radio dials throughout the state of Indiana, because it's going to be on every possible radio station across the state. Phil, I really appreciate you joining me today. We'll hope to see you there on Friday night, but other than that, I really appreciate you being a part of it.
Anytime, Shannon. Great to talk to you.
Well, that's the judge, Phil Houk from Fighting Irish Preview. I'm the coach, Shannon Griffith. This has been the Hoosier Football Tailgate right here on Believe.